The northern wind died to a whisper, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the space between them. Rian couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. His fingers twitched against his thighs, itching to reach for the sword at his hip, yet his arm felt as heavy as stone. The face before him could not be another illusion. His heart refused to believe it. The sharp lines of the jaw, the subtle asymmetry of the brow, the exact shade of those piercing blue eyes. It was Hothen, the elf who had fallen in the northern passes. The father he had failed to remember. "No," Rian breathed, the word torn from his throat, fragile and trembling. "No, you're dead." Adora said, "Everyone said you fell holding the line." Hothenor, the creature wearing his skin, offered a soft, melancholic smile. It was an expression so agonizingly gentle that it cut deeper than any blade. "They believed what they needed to believe, my boy," Hothen said quietly, taking a small, unhurried step forward. "When the passes broke, when the cold took your mother, I did not fall. I was taken, hollowed out, just as you were, bound to the dark so that I might watch our kingdom wither from afar." "You're lying!" Rian shouted, his voice cracking against the frost. "You are another ghost, a trick born of Umbara." Hothen stopped, looking at Rian with an aching tenderness that made Rian's stomach drop into an abyss. "Is it a trick, Rian?" the elf murmured. "Do you remember the night you broke your collarbone on the lower terraces? You were 6 winters old. You were trying to leap from the high arch to impress the guard apprentices. Your mother wept for hours, but when she turned her back, I took you to the quiet springs, gave you a sip of bitter mountain ale, and told you that real warriors don't cry over cracked bone." Rian froze, a sharp, violent spike of agony tearing through his temples. He didn't remember the memory. He couldn't. But deep in the dark marrow of his bones, a sudden, horrifying truth resonated. How could an entity know that? It wasn't written on any ancient wall. It wasn't etched into the stone statue in the sanctuary. It was a secret buried in the dirt of a childhood he had lost. "And the grass charm beneath your breastplate," Hothen continued softly, his eyes dipping to Rian's chest. "Little Lyra. She always had a habit of stealing fruit, didn't she? You caught her with 3 red apples in her tunic. You didn't scold her. You sat on the stone steps and spent an hour showing her how to keep them in the air." "Stop," Rian whispered, his hands coming up to clutch his head as his vision blurred. "Stop it." Suddenly the world behind them exploded. A deafening, earth-shattering roar tore through the valley as the northern horizon erupted into a nightmare of blood and fire. The Inimicus horde had struck. Deep, guttural war cries clashed with the ringing, collective cry of 100 elven archers. High above, the sky split open with a rain of red-tipped arrows, turning the dark into a canopy of falling fire. Steel bit into bone, shields splintered. The frantic, screaming chaos of a full-scale battle erupted just dozens of paces away. But to Rian, it was nothing more than background noise. The roaring fires blurred into streaks of muted orange. The thunderous clash of armies turned into a muffled, distant drone, like waves crashing against a far-off shore. The entire world narrowed down to a single terrifying moment. The man standing in front of him in dark, intricate armor. "Rian! Rian!" Adora's voice cut through the fog, sharp and panicked, as she loosed an arrow into the eye of an advancing Inimicus beast near the flank. "Get back to the line! It's a distraction! Rian!" Rian didn't turn. He couldn't. "You see," Hothen said, his voice completely untainted by the roaring violence surrounding them, clear, endlessly serene. "They fight for a kingdom that is already dead, Rian. They cling to cold stone and ancient grudges, but you and I, we are the blood of Calum. We were meant for more than dying in the mud for old men's pride." "If you are my father," Rian choked out, his vision swimming as he stared into those familiar blue eyes, "then why are you standing on the side of the shadow that stole my mind?" Hothen stepped closer, stopping mere inches from Rian. He reached out, his bare hand cold as mountain ice as he gently rested his palm against the side of Rian's face. "Because, my son," Hothen whispered, his thumb lightly brushing a speck of ash from Rian's cheek, because only the shadow would give me another chance to see my son. Rian's mind reeled, the cold touch of Hothan's palm burning against his skin like liquid ice. Beyond them, the valley had devolved into an inferno. The heavy line of Nostrador shields, standing shoulder to shoulder with the silver-clad spearmen of Mount Calum, smashed violently into the roaring front of the Inimicus tide. Steel bit into dark flesh, iron boots churned the frozen mud, and the men of the south bellowed their ancient war cries, holding the line with brute, unyielding defiance. Seeing the prince paralyzed in the open, Adora knew she wanted only to reach him. She snapped a final, sharp command to Commander Valen, relinquishing control of the archers, drew her bowblade with a harsh metallic clack, and sprinted down into the chaotic meat grinder, hacking through the Dark Legion to carve a bloody path toward Rian. Yet to Rian, the clash of steel and Adora's desperate shouts were mere echoes drifting through deep water. His gaze remained locked on his father's face. "If you were alive." Rian's voice shook, a bitter, agonizing rage finally bleeding through the shock. "If you were serving this being all along, where were you? When my mind was blank, when they carved away my memories and chained me in that false city, where were you? Why didn't you save me?" He swallowed hard, his breath ragged against the freezing air. "When I woke up broken in the dark, bleeding from my injuries, calling out for a family I couldn't even remember. Why didn't you step out from the shadows then?" Hothan's hand did not leave Rian's cheek. His thumb brushed away a smear of dried tears from Rian's cheek, with the tenderness of a father greeting a son after a long journey. "Because it was not written that way, my boy," Hothan murmured, his voice smooth and absolute, sounding like a narrator reading from an ancient scroll. Rian's brow furrowed in sickening confusion. "Written?" "The story demanded your breaking, Rian," Hothan explained softly, a faint melancholic smile playing upon his lips. "The entity, Umbara, holds the pen. I was forbidden from interfering with the script. Every tear you shed, every lie you believed, every agony Zarek and the others inflicted upon your flesh was a necessary stroke of ink to bring us to this exact hour." He leaned in closer, his cold breath brushing Rian's ear over the distant roar of the battle. "You had to suffer, Rian. You had to return home broken so your people would march out into this open field. You are the catalyst, just as it was authored to be." "No," Rian gasped, his hand rising to wrench his father's wrist away, but his fingers felt weak, paralyzed by the sheer terror of what he was hearing. "We aren't characters in a story. This isn't a script." "Isn't it?" Hothan countered, his gaze remaining entirely calm. "Everyone believes they are writing their own story." He smiled sadly. They never stopped to wonder who taught them the words. Just paces away, Adora buried her bowblade into the neck of an advancing Inimicus beast, kicking its corpse aside as she cleared the final barrier of shields. She saw Rian standing helplessly before the dark-armored figure, Hothan's hand cradling his face. "Rian!" Adora screamed, her voice cutting through the din of dying men and roaring beasts as she surged forward, her blade raised to strike. "Get away from him! He isn't real!" Hothan's eyes flicked sharply toward Adora as she surged through the gloom. Without a word, without even a gesture, 4 shadowy Inimicus beasts burst from the chaos of the front lines, their jagged blades drawn as they hurled themselves directly into her path to cut her off. Adora let out a fierce, breathless snarl, her bowblade flashing through the dark as she was forced into a desperate fight for survival, just yards away. Rian's head snapped toward the sound of her blade striking steel, but Hothan's hand tightened on his jaw, forcefully yoking his face back around. The grip was impossibly strong, like iron bands wrapped around his skin. Rian was drenched in sweat now, cold drops running down his neck despite the freezing mountain air. His armor felt suffocating, as though the plates had been filled with lead, weighing him down until his knees threatened to buckle. The hollow, agonizing ache in his chest pulled at his very soul. He felt a terrifying urge to simply stop fighting, to sink into the frozen mud and let the tide wash over him entirely. "You now are faced with a choice, my son," Hothan spoke, his voice entirely unbothered by the violence raging around them, smooth and heavy with absolute conviction. He leaned in closer, those piercing, mirror-like blue eyes burning into Rian's very soul. "You can remain here, locked in this constant turmoil and grief of a past that needs to be erased for good." Hothen's other hand rose, gently resting against the heavy iron pauldrons on Rian's shoulder, steadying the trembling prince. "Or come with me, your father. I can help you regain your memories. We can be a family again." A slow, faint smile pulled at the corners of Rian's lips. For a single, agonizing heartbeat, the weight of the war, the suffocating heavy plate, and the cold mud beneath his boots completely vanished. The possibility bloomed in his mind like a warm light to regain everything he had lost: his family, his identity, his stolen past. In the hazy fog of Hothan's promise, it didn't occur to him for a second that to claim that life, the world he was currently fighting for, Adora, the brave men of Nostrudor, his very existence in Aetheria would have to burn. Then, deep within the dark, fractured vaults of his mind, a spark ignited. He didn't see the dark sky or hear the roaring battle. Instead, he felt the crackle of a warm campfire high in the mountain sanctuary. He was a young boy, resting his heavy head against his grandfather's shoulder, his eyelids growing heavy as the old man's deep, rumbling voice read him an ancient tale. The smell of burning pine and sweet mountain herbs was so crisp, so vibrant, it made his chest ache. It was a beautiful memory, but as it washed over him, a sudden blinding realization struck Rian like a thunderbolt. A memory. It wasn't a story told to him by Zarek. It wasn't a piece of lore Adora had gently tried to rebuild for him. It was his. Solid, true, and real as the ancient foundations of Aetheria itself. He had remembered it entirely on his own. And with that memory came the terrible, undeniable truth of the tale his grandfather had read to him that night. The story of how his mother and father had fallen side by side in battle. His mind flashed to the carved statue of Hothan standing silent in the sanctuary, a monument to a father and protector long dead. The warmth drained instantly from Rian's face. With a sudden and violent wrench, Rian lurked backwards, breaking free from the iron grip of Hothan's hand. Hothan's serene, comforting mask shattered in an instant. The corners of his mouth lifted just slightly into a smile. But it wasn't Hothan's smile. It was something infinitely older. Hothan parted his lips to speak, his hand reaching out to grab Rian once more. Thwack! A crimson feathered arrow buried itself deep into Hothan's intricate dark chest piece with a sickening crunch. The force of the strike did not move the elf. Standing just a few meters away, breathing heavily through gritted teeth with her bow blade still extended, was Adora. She had carved her way through the inimicous beasts, her eyes burning with fierce, unyielding protectiveness as she locked her gaze onto the monster wearing the face of a dead elven lord. Hothan stumbled back a single pace, looking down at the red feathered shaft protruding from his chest with cold, eerie detachment. He did not bleed. He did not scream. He simply looked back up at Rian, those piercing blue eyes narrowing as a low, hollow hiss escaped his throat, dissolving his false warmth into dark, ancient malice. Rian didn't step back this time. The weight in his chest was gone, replaced by the white-hot clarity of a man who finally knew who he was. He drew his sword, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard, and stepped into the space between the monster and the woman who had fought to bring him home. "You are not my father," Rian growled, his voice cutting clean through the roar of the war. "And I am done living in your shadow."